Have you ever wondered why we speak different languages and live scattered across the globe? Let's dive into the pages of Genesis, specifically chapter 11, to explore the fascinating account of the Tower of Babel. Here, we find an audacious attempt by humanity to reach the heavens, a testament to the boundless ambition and pride of human beings. They sought to build a tower, one so tall that it would touch the heavens, an edifice that would serve as a monument to their own greatness and unify them under a single language and purpose. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. God, in his infinite wisdom and sovereignty, looks upon their endeavor. He sees not just a tower of bricks and mortar, but a monument to human pride and arrogance. The tower was a symbol of humanity's misguided ambition to reach the divine, to elevate themselves to the status of God. Such audacity was not left unchecked. In response, God does something remarkable, something that would forever change the course of human history. He confuses their language. Imagine the chaos as people who once understood each other perfectly, now found themselves speaking different tongues. Communication breaks down, the once unified people are fragmented, and their grand project grinds to a halt. As a result, people began to scatter, moving away from Babel to all corners of the earth, taking their new languages with them. This is how we come to have the rich diversity of languages and cultures we see today. It was not a random occurrence, but a divine act. In this account, we see a clear demonstration of God's sovereignty. Regardless of human ambition and pride, it is God who reigns supreme. He is the one who determines the course of history, the rise and fall of nations, the scattering of peoples, and the diversity of languages. In the end, God's will prevailed, scattering people and their languages, thus affirming his supremacy. Have you ever been called to leave everything familiar behind? Picture Abram, a man of considerable age, nestled in the comforts of his homeland, his kin, and his father's house. Yet, in Genesis 12, he hears a call that would change not only his life, but the course of history. God calls Abram to embark on a journey of faith, to leave the familiar and step into the unknown. God's command to Abram was clear. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household, to the land I will show you. This wasn't a suggestion or a request, it was a divine command, but God's command came with a promise that Abram would become a great nation, that he would be blessed abundantly, and through him, all peoples on earth would be blessed. Abram's response was remarkable. He didn't question God's command or demand proof, he simply obeyed. His faith was unwavering and his trust in God's promise was steadfast. Abram packed up his life, gathered his family, and set out for an unknown land, guided by nothing but God's promise. His obedience was the first step on a journey that would shape the world. It was a leap of faith that would lay the foundations for the nation of Israel, the lineage of Jesus, and the salvation of mankind. Abram's leap of faith sets a precedent for us, showing the blessings that come with obedience to God's call. What does it mean to choose the less appealing path? This question takes us to the heart of Genesis 13, where we observe the separation of Abram and Lot, two characters who illustrate the power of humility and trust. Abram and Lot, both blessed with abundant flocks and herds, find that their land can no longer support them both. The solution? A separation, a parting of ways. But this is not a bitter breakup, instead, it's a lesson in generosity. It's Abram who makes the offer, allowing Lot to choose his portion of the land first. He relinquishes his right as the elder, displaying a level of selflessness that leaves a mark on the narrative. Lot, enticed by the lush and fertile plains of Jordan, chooses what appears to be the best of the land, leaving Abram with the seemingly less appealing path. But Abram does not complain or begrudge. He's not driven by envy or resentment. Why? Because he trusts in a promise from God. God tells Abram that all the land he can see will be given to him and his offspring. Despite what seems to be a setback, Abram knows that his future is secure, not because of his own choices, but because of God's promise. Abram's humility and trust in God's promise remind us that God honors those who put others before themselves. This is a timeless lesson, a divine principle that echoes throughout the ages, resonating with every heart that chooses trust over greed and humility over pride. What would you do if God made an unbelievable promise to you? This question sets the stage for our exploration of Genesis chapter 15, a pivotal moment in the narrative of Abram's life. In this chapter, we encounter a divine covenant, a solemn promise made by God to Abram. But this was no ordinary promise. God assured Abram that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, a staggering number beyond human comprehension. Imagine looking up at the vast celestial expanse and trying to count each twinkling star. This was the magnitude of God's promise to Abram. Abram, however, was childless at the time. He and his wife Sarai were advanced in years, and the prospect of having a child, let alone descendants as numerous as the stars, seemed impossible. Yet despite these circumstances, Abram chose to believe. He chose faith over doubt, hope over despair. This response is recorded in the scriptures as a pivotal moment, not just in Abram's life, but in the grand narrative of God's plan for humanity. Genesis 15:6 states, "And he believed the Lord and he counted it to him as righteousness." This single act of faith, this belief in God's promise, was so profound that God considered it as righteousness. Abram's faith set a precedent for all believers to come. He did not see the fulfillment of God's promise in his lifetime, but he believed nonetheless. His faith was not in what he could see or understand, but in the character and promises of God. Abram's story is a testament to the power of faith. It reminds us that even when circumstances seem impossible, when the odds are against us, when our human understanding falls short, we can choose to trust in God's promises. So, let's return to our opening question. What would you do if God made an unbelievable promise to you? Abram's faith in God's promise, despite his circumstances, challenges us to trust in God's promises, even when they seem impossible. Can you find Jesus in the book of Genesis? It may seem like a riddle, but the answer is a resounding yes, and it's found in the very events we've been exploring. Let's delve into this fascinating concept. The Tower of Babel incident, where people were scattered, underscores the profound need for redemption. As their languages were confused and they were dispersed, it foreshadowed the world's desperate need for a savior. And who better to fill this role than Jesus, our Redeemer, who came to bridge the gap between humanity and God? Then we come to Abram's call and blessings. These weren't just for Abram alone, but they were a foreshadowing of the blessings that would flow to all nations through Jesus. Abram, in his faith and obedience, set a precedent for the faith that we are called to have in Jesus. And consider God's covenant with Abram. This was no ordinary contract, but a divine promise that pointed to the new covenant that would be established through Jesus. It was a commitment of God's unwavering faithfulness, a promise that finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. As we see, every story in Genesis points us to Jesus, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise, and the one who brings redemption to all nations. So, next time you open the book of Genesis, remember it's not just about the beginning of time, but also about the beginning of God's plan for our redemption through Jesus Christ.